She woke up before the sun, as she had for years. The small room she called home smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The curtains were torn, letting in thin strips of morning light that fell across the floor in pale lines. She rubbed her eyes and tried to shake off the sleep that seemed heavier than usual, heavier than the weight she carried in her heart. Every day felt the same, quiet, unnoticed, and full of small struggles that no one else seemed to care about. Her mornings began with the same routine. She dressed in worn clothes, patched in places that no one would ever notice. She tied her hair back tightly so it would not fall into her face. Then she carried herself out into the streets, blending with the crowd, invisible to the hurried people who never slowed down to see the ones like her. She moved through the city as if she had no place in it, as if she were a shadow walking alongside the lives of others but never part of them. She worked in a small cafe, a quiet place tucked between two larger stores. The sign outside was faded, the paint peeling, and most people walked past without even glancing at it. Inside, it was dim, with a smell of coffee and bread that never quite warmed her the way she remembered warmth. She swept the floors, washed the dishes, and carried trays, always keeping her head low. The regular customers never looked at her except to place their orders, never asking her name, never noticing if she smiled or not. She liked it that way. It was safer to be invisible, but there was one thing that made her heart beat differently. One thing that made the long hours bearable. In the corner of the cafe stood an old upright piano. It was scratched and worn, with some keys that didn't work properly, but it was hers in the way that it belonged to no one else. She never played it when others were around. She only looked at it, tracing the scratches and imagining what it would feel like to play without fear, without judgment. She had learned to keep her love for music a secret because in the world she lived in, people laughed at those who dreamed too much. Sometimes when the cafe was empty, she would lift the lid and run her fingers lightly over the keys, just to feel them beneath her hands. She remembered the hours she had spent learning music in a small, dim room long ago, when someone had believed in her. Those memories were distant now, almost like they belonged to someone else. But every time she touched the piano, she could hear that person's voice again, telling her that she could do anything if she practiced. That music could be her voice when no one else would listen. The cafe's bell jingled, and she snapped back to the present. A group of regular customers came in, laughing loudly. They didn't notice her as she moved past them with trays of coffee. They didn't notice anything at all. She poured their drinks, filled their plates, and smiled politely when they spoke to her, though their words never truly reached her. They talked about themselves, their work, their plans for the day, never once asking about her, never once seeing her. It was the same every day, and yet as she moved around the cafe, she noticed small things that others missed. The way a particular cup was chipped, the way the sunlight hit the floor at a certain time, the quiet hum of the city outside. She noticed the small patterns of life that no one else cared to see, and she noticed the piano. Always the piano. It sat in the corner, patient and silent, waiting. Sometimes she imagined that it was a friend, someone who understood her without words, who listened without judgment. Her thoughts were interrupted by a laugh from the group at the counter. One of them glanced in her direction and smirked. "Do you even know how to play that thing?" he asked, pointing at the piano. The words were meant to be a joke, a tease. She froze for a moment, not because she didn't know how to play, but because she had learned long ago that the world did not believe in people like her. She forced a smile and shook her head. Keeping her secret close to her chest, she had learned that showing talent could be dangerous. People either ignored it or mocked it. When she was younger, she had played for small crowds, and the laughter had burned her memory. It was easier to hide, easier to survive, than to risk disappointment again. So she nodded, agreed quietly, and moved on, pretending not to care, pretending not to feel the ache in her chest. After the cafe slowed down and the lunch crowd left, she finally allowed herself a few moments near the piano. She lifted the lid, the smell of old wood and polish rising into her nose. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned them over the keys. She closed her eyes, letting the noise of the city fade, letting the hum of the cafe disappear. For a few minutes, the world was gone, and it was only her and the music. The first notes were soft, careful, almost shy. She played slowly, letting each sound resonate, feeling the vibration in her fingertips. She played pieces that had been her favorites since childhood. Pieces that told stories without words, pieces that spoke of joy, sorrow, hope, and loss. She played as if no one could see her, as if the past and the present had melted away, leaving only the music. Sometimes, she imagined the faces of those who had doubted her, those who had laughed at her, those who had said she could never amount to anything. She didn't play for them, not really. She played to remind herself that she had always been capable, that her talent had never left her, that her voice had always existed even when the world tried to silence it. The cafe was quiet now. Only a few customers lingered, absorbed in their conversations. No one noticed her playing. That was fine. She didn't need an audience. Not yet. The piano understood her. It accepted her imperfections, the broken keys, the uneven rhythm, and it returned her effort with music that felt alive. Music that seemed to float through the room and settle gently in the corners as she played. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not the loud. Bright, kind, but a quiet, steady hope, like a small flame flickering in the dark. She realized that, even if no one else believed in her, she still had this. She still had her music. She still had herself. And that was enough for now. Hours passed, though she did not notice. The light shifted, moving across the floor, changing the shapes of the shadows. When she finally stopped, her fingers ached, her heart ached, but in a different way. This ache was not fear or sadness. It was the ache of something long suppressed finally being expressed. She closed the lid gently, as if to protect the music, to keep it safe for another day. The cafe emptied, and she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The streets were busy with people returning home, rushing past each other with little thought for anyone else. She walked slowly, savoring the quiet moments before the night swallowed the city. She thought about the piano, about the music, about the small flame of hope that she carried in her heart. She knew that someday, somehow, that flame might grow brighter. She didn't know when or how, but she could feel it stirring, waiting for the right moment. That night, she lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the city. She imagined herself sitting at the piano in a larger room, not hidden away, not ignored, but in front of people who could hear her, who could feel the music the way she did. The thought made her pulse quicken, made her heart ache with longing. She didn't know if it would ever happen, but she allowed herself to dream, and as she drifted off to sleep, she whispered a promise to herself, a quiet vow that no one else could hear. She would not let the world take her music from her. She would not let the doubts of others silence her. One day she would play, and when she did, the world would have no choice but to listen. For now, she rested, carrying her music inside her. A secret flame in a quiet life, waiting for the day when it could burn bright. She woke up with the same quiet determination that had become a part of her. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains, touching her face with a soft warmth. She lay for a few moments, listening to the distant sounds of the city, waking up the rumble of buses, the chatter of people on the streets, the faint ringing of bicycle bells. She let herself remember the world outside. But she also let herself remember another world, one from long ago. In that other world, music had been her refuge. It had been the one place where she felt safe, where no one's words could touch her, where she could speak without fear of being ignored or laughed at. She had learned to play the piano when she was very young, in a small room filled with sunlight and dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Her teacher had been kind but firm, guiding her fingers over the keys, teaching her how to make the instrument sing. Those lessons had been her sanctuary. Music had given her a voice when life had tried to take everything else away, but life had not been kind. Circumstances had forced her to leave that small room and the lesson she loved so much. She had had to work, to survive, to carry burdens that children should never have to bear. The piano had become a memory, a treasure locked away deep inside her heart. She had tried to forget it at times, thinking it was impossible to hold on to both the music and the life that demanded her attention. But the memory never faded. She carried it with her, quietly, like a small, fragile flame. She made her way to the cafe, the familiar streets passing by like a movie she had seen 100 times. The same people hurried past her, absorbed in their own lives, never noticing the small girl with worn shoes and careful eyes. She walked as if she were invisible, because in many ways, she had learned that invisibility was a kind of protection. People who looked too closely often saw things they didn't want to see, or worse, judged things they didn't understand. When she arrived at the cafe, she greeted the day quietly. She cleaned tables, filled cups, and carried trays with the practiced ease of someone who had done it for years. The regular customers greeted her, some with smiles, most with indifferent nods. They did not know her story. They did not know the years of practice, the hours spent learning, the dreams she carried in her heart. They only saw the quiet girl who worked in the corner. The piano sat in its corner as it always did. Its worn keys and scratched surface were reminders of a life she had not been able to forget. She avoided it when customers were around, hiding her longing behind polite smiles and careful movements. But every now and then, her eyes drifted toward it. Every now and then, she imagined her fingers running over the keys, letting the music flow through her again after the morning rush. When the cafe slowed and the sun was high in the sky, she finally allowed herself a few minutes near the piano. She lifted the lid gently, as if she were opening a book she had not touched in years. The keys were cold under her fingers, some sticking slightly, some chipped, but it did not matter. She placed her hands on them and remembered the lessons. The melodies, the rhythm that had once been as natural as breathing. Her first notes were hesitant, cautious. It had been months since she had allowed herself to play fully, and yet the music flowed as if it had never left her. The melodies were soft at first, almost a whisper, rising slowly into something stronger, something more alive. She played songs that told stories of loneliness, of hope, of strength that had survived despite everything. The music was her language, one that needed no words, one that spoke directly to the heart. As she played, memories came back in sharp, vivid flashes. She remembered a small concert hall where she had once performed, her hands trembling with nervous excitement as she faced an audience for the first time. The applause had been warm and kind, but it was fleeting. Soon, life had pushed her away from the piano, and the crowd had vanished from her memory like a dream upon waking. But the joy, the feeling of music flowing through her, never left. She clung to that memory now, letting it guide her fingers across the keys. Sometimes, she imagined her past self sitting beside her, watching as she played. She imagined the young girl smiling, proud that she had not forgotten, proud that she had survived. The thought brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She had kept the music alive, even in the hardest times. Even when life had been unfair, even when others had doubted her, she had never let the flame die. The cafe remained quiet. Only a few customers lingered, lost in their own conversations. No one watched her as she played. That was fine. She did not need an audience to know the truth. The music itself was enough, was proof that she existed, proof that she had something valuable to offer the world, even if the world did not yet recognize it. And then, unexpectedly, someone did notice. One of the regulars, a man who usually kept to himself, paused and turned toward the piano. He did not speak at first, only listened. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of fear and hope rising in her chest. What if he laughed? What if he dismissed her, like so many others had before? She continued to play, letting the music speak louder than her fears. The man stayed for a long time, silent, watching the way her fingers moved across the keys. She noticed the faint smile that formed on his lips, the way his eyes softened as the melody filled the room. It was a small moment, but it meant more than anything. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time in a long time. The recognition was like a gentle wind stirring the flame she had kept hidden. As the song ended, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had shared a piece of herself, even if only with one person. The fear that had always accompanied her playing had not gone completely, but it had lessened. She realized that the world might not always understand her, might not always be kind, but there was power in keeping her music alive. It was a power that could never be taken away. She closed the lid of the piano carefully, as if tucking a child into bed. She stepped back, letting the moment linger, letting herself feel the small victory. Then she returned to her work in the cafe, carrying the music inside her like a secret treasure. The afternoon passed and its usual rhythm: orders taken, dishes washed, tables cleared, but she moved with a new sense of purpose. Something inside her had shifted. When the cafe closed for the evening, she walked home slowly. The streets were quieter now, the rush of the day fading into a gentle hum. She thought about the piano, about the small recognition she had received, about the life she wanted to build for herself. She knew it would not be easy. There would be many more moments of doubt, many more people who would not believe in her. But she also knew that she had something they could not take away. She had her music. That night, she sat by her small window, looking out at the city lights. She imagined herself performing again, in a place where people would listen, where they would understand the story she could tell through her fingers. The dream felt distant, almost impossible, but she allowed herself to feel it anyway. Dreams were dangerous if you let them go too easily, but they were also necessary. They were the spark that kept the flame alive. She whispered to herself, a quiet promise in the dark. She would not forget. She would continue to play, continue to nurture the music that had carried her this far. One day, she would have the chance to show the world who she really was, to let the music speak when words failed. For now, she had the piano, she had her memories, and she had the quiet strength that had brought her this far. That was enough, and as she finally closed her eyes and drifted into sleep, she felt a deep sense of calm. The flame was still there, small but steady, waiting for the moment it could grow. She did not know when that moment would come, but she knew it would. She had survived too much, learned too much, and carried too much to be silenced forever. The music was a part of her, and as long as she had it, there was hope. The morning arrived as usual, but there was a tension in the air that she could not explain. She went through her routine mechanically, dressing in her worn clothes, tying back her hair, and stepping out into the streets that were slowly filling with people. The city seemed the same, yet she felt a quiet unease, a whisper in her heart that something was different today. She did not know why, but she carried the feeling with her, a small knot of worry and anticipation. The cafe was busy when she arrived. The usual morning crowd had come in early, laughing and talking over the noise of cups, clinking and spoon scraping. She moved among them, carrying trays, wiping tables, taking orders. Everything felt routine, the way it always did. She kept her head down, her hands moving quickly, her mind focused on the work rather than the growing unease she felt. Then it happened. A group of people came into the cafe, younger this time, dressed in bright clothes, and carrying the sort of confidence that made her stomach twist. They looked around with smirks and laughter in their eyes, clearly not regular customers. Of them, taller than the rest, glanced toward her and the piano in the corner. His voice cut through the chatter like a sudden cold wind. "Do you even know how to play that thing?" he asked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The words were meant to humiliate. He carried a sharp edge, a mocking tone that made her chest tighten. She froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. In the past, words like these had broken her, made her doubt herself, made her hide her talent even further. She looked at the piano, its worn keys gleaming faintly under the light, and felt the familiar pull of the music she loved so much. The man laughed again, louder this time. "Come on, play something. I want to hear if it's as bad as I imagine." The others joined in, leaning closer, whispering and snickering. The cafe seemed smaller, suddenly the walls closing in. People around them glanced at her, some smiling awkwardly, some unsure what to do, but no one stepped in. She realized that if she did not act, the moment would pass, and she would retreat again, letting them win without even trying. Her fingers hovered over the piano keys, trembling slightly. She could feel the old fear rising, the fear that had haunted her every performance, every attempt to show her music. But there was something different this time. The music had been inside her for so long, waiting, patient, unyielding. It did not belong to anyone else. and it would not be silenced by laughter or doubt. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the bench. The people in the cafe leaned closer, some curious, some expecting disaster. She closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the whispers, the laughter, the skeptical gazes. She remembered the small room where she had first learned to play, remembered the warmth of the sunlight and the way her teacher had guided her hands over the keys. She remembered the feeling of music rising through her, pure and untouchable. Then she began to play. The first notes were careful, soft, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters. The laughter around her faded slightly, replaced by a curious silence. She felt the vibration of the keys beneath her fingers, felt the flow of sound through her, and her confidence grew. The notes became stronger, more certain. She played a melody that had been in her heart for years, a song that told a story of struggle, of survival, of quiet strength. The taller man's smirk faltered. He leaned forward slightly, listening more closely. The others exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. The cafe grew still, as if the music itself had paused the world for a few moments. Her hands moved across the keys with precision and emotion, each note carrying a piece of her story, each chord speaking louder than words could. As she continued, memories surfaced in vivid flashes. She remembered the hours she had spent alone, practicing in secret. She remembered the nights when she had no one to play for, the times she had doubted herself, the times she had wanted to give up but did not. The music carried all of that, turning her pain, her hope, her resilience into something beautiful. People began to notice more fully now. The cafe regulars stopped what they were doing, their eyes widening as the sound filled the room. The young group who had mocked her shifted uncomfortably. Their confidence began to crack as they realized this was no ordinary girl playing a few simple notes. This was someone who had lived her music, who had poured her life into it, and who was not afraid to let it speak. The taller man leaned closer, disbelief in his eyes. He had expected a joke, a weak performance to confirm his ridicule. But what he heard was extraordinary. The melody twisted and turned, delicate and powerful, sad and hopeful, all at once. Each note told a story of hardship and courage, of quiet victories that no one had witnessed. The music demanded attention, respect, even from those who had meant to mock it. Her fingers flew across the keys with a confidence that had grown over years of secret practice. She played with passion, with precision, with everything she had kept locked inside her. The laughter that had filled the room moments before was gone, replaced by awe, by a quiet reverence that she had never experienced before. Even the cafe staff paused in their tasks, watching in wonder. She did not notice the time passing. She did not notice the wide eyes, the whispered murmurs, the sudden stillness. She was lost in the music, in the story she was telling without words. The notes soared, dipped, and rose again, carrying the emotion she had buried for so long. She played for herself, for the young girl she had once been, for the music that had always been her refuge. Finally, she reached the final chord. A note that lingered in the air long after her fingers had left the keys. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like everyone is holding their breath. She opened her eyes slowly, and for the first time, she looked around the cafe as if she belonged there. The taller man stared at her, his mouth slightly open, unable to form the words that might explain what he had just heard. The others in his group looked at each other, confusion and awe mixing on their faces. They had come to mock, to laugh, to prove that she was nothing. But now, they could not deny what they had just experienced. The music had spoken louder than their ridicule. It had told a story that no one could ignore, a story that demanded respect. Even the regular customers seemed different. They nodded quietly, some with tears in their eyes, some with small smiles of recognition. They had seen her in the corner for so long, quiet and unnoticed, and now they understood, even a little. The depth of talent and courage she carried. She was no longer invisible. The piano, her constant companion, had become her voice, her shield, and her proof that she could rise above doubt. The taller man finally found his voice, though it was small, hesitant. I didn't expect that, he said. His words were meant to be casual, but they carried the weight of genuine surprise. He looked at her differently now, not with the smirk of mockery, but with something closer to respect. He did not know what to say next, and so he said nothing. She stood slowly, feeling the adrenaline leave her body, leaving behind a calm satisfaction she had not known in years. She had faced their laughter, their doubt, and she had not only survived but shone. The music had done more than fill the room. It had shifted the energy, changed the perception, and, most importantly, reminded her of her own strength. The cafe returned to its normal rhythm, though the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were quieter, smiles more genuine, glances more attentive. People lingered longer, and she noticed them noticing her in ways they never had before. The piano remained in the corner, silent now but powerful, a witness to the moment when doubt had been silenced by talent and courage. That night, she walked home with a lightness she had not felt in years. The streets were the same, the city unchanged, but she felt different. Something inside her had shifted, something that made her step taller, breathe easier, and believe in herself a little more. She had faced the mockery, and she had triumphed, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the music that had always been hers. As she lay in bed, she replayed the day in her mind. She remembered the faces, the silence, the way the music had flowed through the cafe and into the hearts of those who had doubted her. She realized that this was only the beginning. The world might still doubt her, might still mock her, but she now knew that she had a power that could not be taken away. She had her voice, her talent, and the courage to use them. And in the quiet of the night, she whispered to herself, a vow carried softly on her breath. No matter what the world said, no matter how many doubted her, she would play. She would let the music speak. She would let her story be heard. And one day, she would show everyone that the flame she carried could never be extinguished. The cafe was quiet now. It's a kind of quiet that felt almost sacred. The music had stopped, but the notes seemed to linger in the air, wrapping around the room like a gentle fog. People did not speak. They did not move. They were frozen in a moment they had not expected to feel. The young woman sat at the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys, her heart pounding with the realization of what she had just done. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not just noticed, not just acknowledged, but truly seen. The people who had come to mock her, who had expected laughter and failure, were silent. Their expressions a mixture of shock and awe. Even the regular customers who had long overlooked her seemed to see her for the first time. She realized that the music had done more than silence, doubt it had touched hearts. She took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch a little longer before she spoke. "Thank you," she said softly, almost to herself, but loud enough for those nearest to hear. Her voice trembled slightly, a reminder of all the years she had hidden, all the times she had believed she was invisible. And yet there was a strength in her voice now, one that had grown from the courage to play despite fear. Despite doubt, despite mockery, one of the cafe regulars, an older woman who had always been kind but quiet, stepped forward. Her eyes were glistening. I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I never knew you could play like that." "Ah!" She looked around at the others. None of us did. There was no judgment in her words, only awe and sincerity. The young woman nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The group that had mocked her was still there, lingering awkwardly near the counter. The tallest of them, the one who had first spoken, approached slowly, his confidence gone. He avoided her eyes for a moment, then finally met her gaze. "That was incredible," he said, his voice low. "I didn't expect that." The others murmured their agreement, reluctant but genuine. They had come to laugh, but the music had spoken louder than they could ignore. She did not respond immediately. She only looked at the piano, letting her fingers brush the keys lightly. The instrument had carried her story for her, had voiced the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. She realized that the music had not only silenced mockery, it had opened doors she had thought were forever closed. The room felt different now, charged with a respect and recognition that she had never experienced before. encouraged by the silence and the attention. Ah, she began to play again. This time, the notes were freer, more expressive. Carrying a confidence born from the knowledge that she had nothing to prove to anyone but herself, the melodies flowed through the cafe, wrapping around the listeners, stirring memories and emotions they had not expected to confront. Some closed their eyes, letting the music fill them, while others leaned forward, caught in the beauty of the performance. The taller man who had mocked her watched closely. He had never expected to feel something so powerful, so genuine. He could see the years of practice, the hidden struggles, and the sheer dedication behind each note. The music was no longer just sound. It was a story unfolding before them, a tale of perseverance, of hope, and of triumph over doubt. Her hands moved across the keys with increasing confidence. Each chord, each note, seemed to carry a message. It was as if she were speaking directly to the hearts of the listeners, telling them a story that words could not capture. She played with a vulnerability that made the room hold its breath, a vulnerability that transformed the atmosphere. The cafe, once ordinary and unnoticed, felt alive with emotion, alive with the power of music to move people. Some of the young group who had come to mock her shifted uncomfortably. They had expected a joke, a weak performance to laugh at. Instead, they were confronted with talent, passion, and truth. They felt their own arrogance shrink as the music swept over them. For the first time, they could not hide behind smirks or laughter. They were forced to listen, to feel, to confront the reality of someone who had been underestimated and overlooked for far too long. The older woman approached the piano slowly, her hands trembling slightly. You should play more," she said softly. "The world needs to hear you." The young woman nodded, her eyes glistening. She had spent so long hiding, so long believing that her music was only for herself, only for secret moments. But now she realized that her music could touch others, could inspire, could change the way people saw the world and herself. As the music continued, more people in the cafe paused what they were doing. They gathered near the piano, some standing silently, others whispering softly to each other about the unexpected performance. The energy in the room shifted, a collective awe spreading through everyone present. The young woman felt a quiet pride swell in her chest. She had faced doubt, mockery, fear, and she had risen above it. Her final note lingered in the air, soft and haunting, and the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then slowly, the sound of applause began. It started as a few claps from the regulars, then grew as more joined in, hesitant at first, then with full enthusiasm. The young woman smiled, a smile that had not been seen for years. It was a smile of triumph, of release, of recognition. She had played her heart, and the world had finally listened. She stood from the piano, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. She knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more doubts, more people who would not understand. But she also knew that she had discovered something powerful, the ability to let her music speak for her, to touch hearts, to inspire respect and awe. As she looked around the cafe, she noticed the change in people's expressions. Even the group who had mocked her now looked at her with a new understanding. They had come with laughter and arrogance, and they were leaving with a recognition of something greater than themselves. They had witnessed a moment of courage, of talent, of truth, and it had left an impression they would not forget. The young woman walked home that evening with a lightness she had never felt before. The streets were the same, the city unchanged, but she felt different. She felt seen, understood, and alive in a way that she had not for years. The music had changed the room, the people, and most importantly, herself. She had faced fear and doubt and emerged victorious that night. As she lay on her thin mattress, she replayed the performance in her mind. She remembered the expressions on the listeners' faces, the hush that had fallen, the way the music had wrapped around the cafe like a living thing. She realized that the power of music was greater than she had ever imagined. It could heal, inspire, and transform. It could break barriers, shatter doubt, and touch hearts. And as she drifted into sleep, she whispered to herself, a quiet vow in the dark. She would continue to play, continue to share her music, and continue to let it speak for her. The flame inside her had grown brighter, and she knew that it would only burn stronger from this day forward. The next morning, the city seemed brighter, though nothing had truly changed. She woke with a sense of purpose she had not felt before. The memory of yesterday's performance, of the awe on people's faces, of the silence and then the applause, filled her with a quiet determination. She knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of something she had longed for her entire life. Her steps toward the cafe were lighter, her breath steadier. People passed her on the streets, rushing to their lives. But she noticed the small things now, the sunlight catching on a window, the pattern of leaves dancing in the wind, the hum of the city waking up. She felt more alive, more connected to the world around her, and yet more aware of the path she had yet to walk. The cafe welcomed her like always, its familiar scent wrapping around her. But today, there was a difference in the air. Customers glanced at her with recognition, some smiling softly, some nodding in quiet respect. The piano, sitting in its corner, seemed to hum with possibility, as if waiting for her to unlock more of its secrets. She approached it, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. Remembering the moments of courage and triumph from yesterday, the regulars who had watched her perform came in first, their faces lighting up at the sight of her. "We can't wait to hear you again," one said softly. "You have a gift, and it's meant to be shared." The words struck her deeply. She had spent so long hiding, so long believing that her music was only for secret moments. But now, she felt a responsibility, a calling, to let her music reach others, to let her story be told through the keys of the piano. As she began to play, the cafe filled with a gentle, soothing melody. It was different from yesterday's performance, not a response to mockery, but a sharing of herself. The notes carried warmth, hope, and resilience. Each chord seemed to speak directly to the hearts of the listeners, telling them a story of survival, courage, and beauty. The room became still, everyone caught in the quiet magic of the music. Conversations ceased. Cups were set down, and all eyes turned toward her. Even those who had once doubted, who had once overlooked her, now watched with rapt attention. The piano had become her voice, and through it, she could reach places words could never touch. She lost herself in the music, letting it flow through her, carrying her memories, her dreams, her struggles, and her triumphs. The notes rose and fell, soft and strong, delicate and powerful, telling a story without words, but with all the emotion of a lifetime. She played not for recognition, not for applause, but for the pure joy of sharing the music that had always been her companion. People wept quietly, moved by the depth of feeling that poured from her hands. Some smiled through tears. Others held their breath, caught in the raw beauty of the moment. The cafe, once ordinary and unnoticed, had transformed into a sanctuary, a place where hearts were touched and souls awakened by the power of music. As she played the final note, a silence followed, heavy and profound. Then, slowly, the room erupted into applause, cheers, and whispers of admiration. The sound was overwhelming, but she stood calmly, letting it wash over her, feeling the truth of what she had accomplished. She had shared herself fully, without fear, without reservation, and the world had responded with wonder and respect. From that day on, her life began to change in small but meaningful ways. People sought her out, wanting to hear her play, to witness the magic of her music. She was offered opportunities she had never dreamed of, invitations to perform, to teach, to share her gift with a wider audience. Yet through it all, she remained grounded, knowing that her journey had not been about fame or recognition, but about finding her voice and letting it be heard. She continued to play in the cafe, each performance growing in confidence and beauty. She touched hearts, inspired courage, and reminded everyone who listened that talent and passion could not be hidden forever. The flame she had carried in silence had become a beacon, guiding her and others toward hope and joy. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed still, she would sit at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys, and remember the long journey she had traveled. She thought of the doubt, the fear, the mockery, and she smiled, knowing that she had overcome it all. The music had been her salvation, her voice, and her power. She whispered to herself. A soft promise carried in the stillness. No matter what came next, she would continue to play. She would continue to share her music. She would continue to let it speak for her, and through it, she would inspire, heal, and transform. For she had learned that the true power of music was not in the applause, not in the recognition, but in its ability to touch hearts and change lives, including her own. And so, she played every day, letting her story unfold one note at a time. Her song echoing in the hearts of those who listened, and in her own heart, strong, steady, and free. The morning air was crisp as she stepped out into the city streets, carrying a quiet excitement in her chest. The sunlight touched the buildings in soft streaks, reflecting off windows and creating patterns of light that danced across the pavement. She walked with a steady rhythm, her thoughts alive with possibilities, her heart beating with a sense of anticipation she could not quite name. Today felt different, though she could not explain why. The cafe where she had first shown her music to the world was already bustling when she arrived. Familiar faces greeted her with nods, smiles, and quiet words of encouragement. Some of the regulars who had once barely noticed her now seemed eager to see her play again. Even the group that had mocked her months ago stopped by, offering polite smiles and murmured compliments. She,